The purpose of a Christian. There have been many essays written about the purpose of man. They can only be valid if there is one thing called man, and if this entire group is defined by some feature that is common to all. But this is not necessarily so. If man is to have a purpose, then how much more ought a Christian to have a purpose? Indeed, the very idea of a purpose invokes God and suggests, if there is a purpose at all and if this purpose is ordained by God, this purpose would be found in the church, and less, or not at all, in anything else. Indeed, this purpose could be expected to be less in evidence, as one is separated from God. Indeed, it is not such a great leap of logic to assume, those who oppose God, oppose His purpose and that there is indeed a separation from those who invoke her purpose and those who do not. In short, the purpose of man, is less a purpose of man, than a division and indeed, the makings of a great war. The purpose of man, the more we find evidence of it, is actually a cause to divide the world into two camps. The purpose of man is not a purpose, but an existential point of contention that is irreconcilable and inerasable. It will, eventually, force the world into a conflagration such as has never been seen before. But this war of cross purposes is rarely fought as a physical fight. The purposes of man, as different as they are not clearly seen and so do not cause the conflicts that it will cause. The purpose of man when he is a Christian is not defined by physical things. There is nothing physical to fight over that would define the purpose God gave to us. The purpose of man consists of an experiment. Our purpose is to seek the truth in a verifiable way. Our purpose has more to do with the nature of truth than with our individual preferences. Because ultimately, our purpose is a war fought against those who seek to thwart it and deny us our objective. If we win this war and if we fulfill our purpose, a case will be made for God. The categorical imperative is to create value. That which is the imperative must also be our purpose. But this imperative begs the question, how do we create value? But the answer as to how to create value leads to a who creates it. What sort of person ought we to be? To fulfill our purpose we must mature, because to create value is to create maturity. It is the ability to participate in civilization that defines maturity. It is the ability to create value in a sustainable way that marks us as being mature. Ultimately our purpose is simply to grow up, to join the human race as a full member, and to pay our own way and create progress. This brings us back to the idea of a war. Because of necessity we are fighting the forces of decay and dissolution, and of corruption and waste. We fight those who consume without creating value. But if we were fighting a physical war, this war would only produce physical gains. The victors would gain property, they would gain power. In a war of the flesh, the winner would win in a way consistent with the law of the jungle. But this is the law the fallen world is under. There are no spiritual victories in a war of the flesh. The evil ones whose desire is to thwart our purpose, want to get us into physical wars. They want us to think that riots and revolutions and demonstrations is the way to get what we want. The people of the flesh want us to rely on politicians, because these will lead us into wars fought flesh against flesh. These are wars only those of the flesh can win. We only get more lost and further from Christ if we allow ourselves to engage in these physical trials by combat. Christians win by building the church. We win by creating value. It is not flesh and blood we fight our own immaturity. We fight the desire to remain infants and live free. There is a way that seems wise to the world. It leads to death and destruction, because this way is formed by the thoughts of a child. It is true that Jesus told us that we are to forbid them not to come unto me, speaking of children. In Matthew 19:14 he makes this clear. But what he was saying is that we are not to hinder the spiritual development of the child. We are to not interfere with the child's development into maturity. The desire of the little children to come to Jesus was a parable to illustrate our own need to grow into maturity in Christ. We are not to remain children, nor live forever as children. Maturity is not a haphazard process. It needs to be done in a mature way. One of the hallmarks of an adult is the way we live. An adult life is a purposeful life. We are not driven this way and that by our emotions. The church is not a people or buildings. It is the spiritually mature. But how are we to manifest this maturity to the world? In what way do the spiritually mature serve a light unto the world? It is our purpose-driven life. People see that we know where we are going and why. But all of this building of the church and finding God is part of the process of becoming spiritually mature. But if we are truly becoming mature in this sense, as a church, the church is more akin to a business than a place for Christians to socialize. The church, in fact, is a business opportunity like no other. It is as in operating as a business that we unite the three pillars of society, the economic, political and theological sectors. Our purpose as business people is to add value to the world. We are to be of use. It is in business that we reach the highest level of maturity. We mature in business as our business matures. This is the environment in which the spiritual mature. The ostensible Christian is a good businessman. Our business model is so effective it makes the state redundant. The businessman does not consume everything he produces, he invests, and he adds value to the world. But the way of the world is not truly businesslike. The world consumes what God produces but does not add much value to what belongs to God. There are the things of God. These are assets. Man, in his mature state, adds value to assets, and this is called equity. We can own the equity we create, we cannot own assets. In the way the world does business, a man invests capital. This is his equity or owner's equity. But there is another component that needs to be accounted for. There are other claims on the business, and these claims are expressed as a liability account. Liabilities are claims others have on the assets of the business. But God is not included in our books. In a priori and apologetics businesses there are no liabilities. There are no claims on an apologetic business's assets, because in apologetics, there are no assets. The assets we have belong to God to be used for His purposes. But assets in the church are never liabilities, they always retain their value as assets. Assets in the a priorian business model never represent a risk to a business operation. When there are no liabilities, become a liability, there are no risks. A risk always represents a claim, even a threat, to one's assets. Without an asset on the books as a liability, there is nothing to risk and no threats. If a Christian is defined as a person doing the will of Christ, and it is the will of Christ that we ought to help others and do good in the world, then the purpose of a Christian is to be successful as a business person. It also means that assets dedicated to this purpose never become transformed into a negative. Assets in the a priorian business model always have a positive value. Christians must construct the church according to the guidelines established by God. We need to sell all we have and give the proceeds to the poor, these are the ones without assets, which is the church. If you follow the logic of the Bible, the proceeds of a sale always go to the church. The church represents God on earth and acts in the role of a trustee. An apologist is a member of the church who operates a business for the church. The mission of every business is to build up the church, which is the body of Christ. A business is always a work that is being done in faith. But as a worker in the church of God, the apologist is always worthy of his wages. And so, the church is required to be a business in order to reward those who do the work of God. Christianity is the only logical philosophy available to man. This need for the church, as a business, to pay for all the work done by apologists, creates a problem. We, as the church, must give to the state what belongs to the state and to God what belongs to God. We give to God the assets He created. But money belongs to the state. So, what do we pay our supporters with? Supporters add equity to assets, and so the church adds equity to the supporters' account. It is as simple as that. Do you want a business? Do you never want to risk being unemployed again? Would you like to work with Christians only? Would you like a business that supports the building of the Christian family? Do you hate taking risk? Can you not afford to spend any money on starting a business? Cannot you not afford to risk losing any money on starting a business? Are you willing to start a business if there is no risk or threat of loss if you do so? Then a priorian apologetics is the business designed for you. There is no investment needed, as the opportunity is designed by God to build His church. It is not a program to make anyone wealthy. It is designed to create mature Christians. There are no risks or threats of loss because God does not design things that do not work. All it takes to start or build an a priorian apologetics franchise is people, because it is people who build the church. All it takes to build an a priorian apologetics franchise is faith, because all we need to build the church is faith. All it takes to build the church is 2 or 3 people coming together in His name. If you can build a church, you can build a business that is the church. The secret to civilization is the level of specialization that exists. Specialization is the source of all progress and economic development. But to be able to focus on one particular part of the supply chain means you have faith that the rest of your needs can be satisfied by means of the market. No one will invest a considerable amount of time and energy in perfecting a craft he or she cannot then take that skill and exchange the results for everything else they need. The power of a culture is the amount of time and other resources a person can invest in a particular skill set and the expectation of a reward further down the road. It is the strength of our faith in each other because of our Christianity that gave Westerners the advantage it has over other cultures and peoples. By eliminating all risk with starting a business, everyone who has a business idea can start a business. And the more this happens, the more specialties that are needed. When starting a business is free and risk-free, more specialization is made possible. If this happens with one system more than others, that system or program will succeed to a greater degree than the alternatives. There is no system that makes it possible to start a business easier and than the church, and so the church will ultimately be the most successful business enterprise the world has seen.